let's welcome back to the programme somebody I'm more than fond of. He's a remarkable man. I told you earlier on, not that you needed to be told, that for decades, as a very, very high-ranking CIA officer, he briefed several US presidents. He's a writer, a journalist and an activist these days, and I recommend his articles, which I read all the time. You can read them at his website, raymcgovern.com. It's a real pleasure to welcome back to the programme our friend Ray McGovern. I know you're busy and you're in demand today because of all that's going on, Ray, so sincere thanks for giving us some of your time. Thank you. And welcome.
You're most welcome.
Great to have you back. You obviously, because you told me, saw the press conference following the Trump-Putin meeting. Obviously, the online news wires and the 24-hour cable news channels have gone crazy. It's a circus. What did you make of what was said by both men regarding, obviously, collusion and hacking, which you've written extensively about, and I've tweeted your articles out. Great stuff, you and Bill Binney. What did you make of what you saw in that press conference?
Well, you know, Richie, if you watched it, or those of your listeners watched it, you saw a man being thrown out before the press conference ever began.
Yeah.
He's a friend of mine. His name is Sam Husseini. He was covering the press conference, or the media conference, for The Nation magazine. What was his offense? He had a little piece of paper, 8 by 5, or what are they, normal size, which said, treaty to ban nuclear weapons. Whoa, is there such a treaty? Well, yes, there is. Is it in force? Well, yes, it is. How many countries have signed it? 59. Was it a major achievement? Well, it's the first legally binding international agreement to comprehensively prohibit nuclear weapons with the goal of leading toward total elimination. How old is it? Just a week over 1 year old. Was it mentioned at the press conference?
No.
No. Okay. Now, you know, I'm happy to talk about the press conference itself, but I think sometimes we have to take about 5 steps back. What's the real danger to us here? I have 9 grandchildren. What's the danger to them? Well, I have just finished reading Daniel Ellsberg's major life's work. It's called The Doomsday Machine. It will stand your hair on end. I was aware of some of the close misses there. We almost destroyed each other and the planet, but I was hardly aware of all of them. And of course, the doomsday clock that was invented way back in the 50s is now at 2 minutes to doomsday. Now, of course, we're sloughing off on our nuclear weapons, right? Yeah, right. $1 trillion, $1 trillion being sunk into modernizing, updating, making them more accurate over the last 10 years. That's what the U.S. intends. And Russia, well, they're more clever. They keep some money out of their budget for social concerns. And they'll keep pace. They're very talented people, and they'll build lots of weapons to compete. So my sense is that when a man who is not shouting, you know, it's sort of like what happened to me at the U.S. Senate just about 2 months ago, when he's there with a piece of paper that somebody says, "Oh, what's he got on a piece of paper? Ban nuclear weapons, or treaty to ban nuclear weapons." Well, wow, they got to throw him out?
A legitimate question, Ray. Presumably, Sam was there to ask that question, the one you've posed there. What's happening with this treaty, and why aren't... You're right to mention that Trump announced only last week that, you know, unthinkable, unfathomable amounts of money were being spent to upgrade and to basically maintain the fleet of nukes that the US has. So presumably Sam was there to say, what's this all about?
Yeah, well, the way those things are orchestrated, as you know, Richie, is that he never would have been called upon. And what he said was that he just wanted to hold it up, you know? I mean, if there's any human embarrassment to 2 world leaders talking about everything other than the main problem facing the world, when there's something wrong there, and I really admire a guy like Sam, who peaceably, without disrupting, just wanted to hold up the sign. Now, what's the implications here? We talk about freedom of the press. The Western world is bragging about how strong and how true to the freedom of the press the Finns are. There were 600 placards on the way from the airport into wherever this thing was held, and Trump had to see them all. And he also said, freedom of the press. Well, wait a second, folks. Here are the Finns. They're doing the security here, right? Did they agree? Did they agree to a procedure where somebody was not allowed to hold up a sign? My God. So it's pretty bad. And when the Finns, who are bragging about how liberal they are on freedom of the press, don't even allow a fellow like a peaceable fellow, and I can vouch for that, like Sam Husseini, to hold up a sign, well, we come to a pretty bad pass. And, I can talk about the press conference itself now, but, it's really necessary to stress that when we talk about what should have been discussed there or what things should have been launched, now it is possible that the START II treaty will be lengthened. I think it expires in 2021. But not much attention was given to the strategic situation. And that, of course, is to the extent that things are just as labile, as the Germans say, just as delicate and as tentative as they have been since we invented these things. Well, I just hope that my grandchildren are as lucky as I have been in living through the last several decades where we almost blew up the planet, and that should have been at least called to people's attention. So my hat's off to Sam Husseini for doing that. My hat's not off for the Finns, who abided by these very restrictive, even in the U.S. Senate, you can hold up. Well, unless they tell you not to expressly, like my Code Pink people were told before the Senate hearing on the torturer who is now head of the CIA, they told they couldn't. First they said, yeah, you can hold your plackets. And as soon as they did, they got arrested and thrown out. So, yeah, it's pretty bad. And when you're not able to talk about doomsday minus 2 hours, then, that's a very cogent, a very graphic illustration of how bad it is with respect to how you restrict the questions. But even so, the press conference was interesting. And sorry for this long preface, but I think we do need to take into account what really matters, and what really matters cannot be discussed, at least in current circumstances.
Listen, I'm a little bit embarrassed, and maybe there's something that maybe guys like me need to become aware of. A kind of a jadedness, Ray. I saw that incident, obviously. And maybe because I've seen so many of them in recent years, including, the disgraceful treatment of yourself, that I neglected to bring it up. And really, I need to be bringing that up at the beginning of conversations like this. But it's become such a normal thing that, you look at it and you think, Christ, that's terrible. And then you just go on and you look at, what else was said in the press conference and reading your articles and talking about collusion and all of that and the DNC. I should have been asking you that. Mea culpa. Of course it's hugely important. But that's just how regular this is becoming, that real journalists, people with serious credentials, with good questions to ask or points to make, are being manhandled and physically assaulted and abused in that way. So you don't apologise for bringing it up. Of course we have to talk about it. And I'm annoyed with myself for being so blasé about it, watching it and thinking, well, this happens all the bloody time, And then 15 minutes later I'm thinking of something else. But maybe it's easy for me to be like that because I do what I do from the comforts of my office and my studio, and I don't go to these places to confront these people. So you're right.
Well,
you're right.
Well, you got a full-time job keeping you from doing that. But when people like Sam step up to the plate, as we say here in the States, those are the kinds of examples that we need more of.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just add one little vignette. When I confronted Donald Rumsfeld, who used to be our Secretary of Defense, and caught him in two major lies about weapons of mass destruction and so-called ties between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, that was on live TV, okay? and it was on live TV and CNN and C-SPAN. And so when the goons came down to get me, Rumsfeld looked at the cameras and he said, "No, no, 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 no. Let them stay for a second, okay?" Now, what was the difference there? The difference there was that those cameras would have captured what happened to me. I was one of these guys in a black hat, of all things, put his elbow in my solar plexus and was pushing me away from the microphone, but I had the presence of mind to hold on to the microphone, so whatever happened to me was going to be broadcast as well. Now, what I want to say is that as I left that place, here's Anderson Cooper. Gets on the phone, calls me my cell. "Mr. McGovern, you're causing quite a stir down here in Atlanta. We'd like to have you on my program, but first I have to ask you a question." I said, "Oh, what's that, Anderson?" He said, "Well, how do I say this? Weren't you afraid?" Now I said to myself, Richie,
wow, were you afraid?
My God, here's Anderson Cooper, heir to the Vanderbilt fortune, pretty face on CNN, and he's asking me, wasn't I afraid? So I let him have it. I said, "Anderson, I have to be really candid with you. I had done my homework. I knew if I asked him certain questions, he'd have to lie or at least admit that he was wrong before. You might want to try that sometime, Anderson. Do your homework. ask some real questions. You'll find it's a real high. You really will." He said, well, I'll have my people get in touch with your people." I said, No, Anderson, I don't have any people.
It's just me.
Just call me back." And I went on the show that night, and he asked me the same question to lead off. These people have no shame. Why are they afraid? Well, I've gone on too long, but this is one of the things that comes out at these press conferences. They are afraid of real questions. And if they want to keep, there was a lady taking pictures on her cell phone. Who was that? That was Mary Louise Kelly. Who is she? Well, she's the expert, in quotes, on National Public Radio. Okay. Now, you would have think that she would be remonstrating with these goons, right? "Oh, no. She's just taking pictures of what happened to Sam. She's taking the picture." I mean, there's no solidarity at all. So
I saw that lady. I had no idea who she was. I saw that lady with the dark hair, the long hair, taking photographs. That's who you're referring to. Yeah,
no, I think she's got blonde hair.
She's blonde
I may
hair,
have it wrong, but she.
I doubt you're wrong. I doubt you're wrong. It's probably me. But yeah, why take pictures there? And why not stand up? And why not encourage the other press members to stand up and say, "Well, I'll tell you what, guys. As long as Sam has been put out of the room, we're not going to stick around either. They either take questions from all of us and let us cover it, or none of us." I mean,
wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
We can aspire to that. We're a long way from it now, but who knows? Maybe everything's possible.
John Brennan, former CIA chief, of course, under Obama. It's a weird world, Ray. I've been making television programs, radio programs, I should say, and to a lesser extent TV for 20 years. I've never known anything like this. It's very theatrical, very soap opera-esque. He said that Trump's performance was high crimes and misdemeanors, treasonous even, and that Trump's comments were imbecilic and indicative of the fact that he is in the pocket of Putin. This is obviously to do with collusion. Now, you've been talking about these collusion allegations since they began, and writing about them and debunking them and analysing them in a way that really nobody else has been doing, to be absolutely fair to you. What's going on here, Ray? There is no evidence. There's none that I can see.
With respect to Brennan and his comment that Trump's performance today was, quote, "nothing short of treasonous," end quote. Well, what we have here is sort of mirror imaging. John Brennan is running scared. They're about to get to him. They're going through the small fry now in the FBI. And sooner or later, the small fry, or the medium fry, if we want to talk about Peter Strzok, are going to realize that they've been had. Okay, they're taking the rap for John Brennan, Jim Comey, the guy at NSA, whoever you happen to be at the time, and James Clapper. And when people say, "Well, come on, Ray, you think there really was an attempt to affect the election?" I say, sure there was, But it wasn't the Russians.
Yeah.
It was Brennan. It was struck. I mean, it's very clear in these text messages. They wanted to prevent this guy from becoming president. And when he became president, they kept at it so that he would be impeached. It's very clear. So what's going to happen? They're going to get to John Brennan. I would predict maybe it'd be 2 months before they sort out what Brennan did. And I fully expect that once these, well, not really smart people at the FBI realize they've been had, okay, that they discharge these orders from upper people like James Comey and John Brennan, they're going to turn state's evidence, plea bargain, or at least cooperate, as we say in the States, and the truth will come out. Now, is that Pollyanna? Well, the deep state usually wins these things. So in one sense, it is Pollyanna, but it's the truth. And it explains why John Brennan, he's not a real bright guy. He should be he should be somewhere in New Zealand hiding out because they come after him. Instead, he's calling Trump treasonous, whereas it's on the record that Brennan, with this dossier, which was mentioned today, and other really, really stupid tricks, violated the law. And the only way you can explain this, a lot of these people, the highest law enforcement people in our government, how did they think they could get away with it? Simple. Hillary was a shoo-in. No one was going to indict these guys for doing what they did. They're going to get special awards and be able to stay in place like Brennan wanted to. So unless you understand that they were proceeding on the assumption, and Comey has said this explicitly, he said, we were proceeding in an environment where Hillary Clinton was going to win. And so, blah, blah, blah. And so we played fast and loose with the law. We tried to sabotage Trump. And when he won, we kept trying to sabotage him, and they're still doing it to this day. Witness the fact that right before he goes off to Helsinki, or off to Europe at least, off to Helsinki, they list, they indict 12 ham sandwiches. I mean, you probably know. You know that expression, right? The grand jury could indict a ham sandwich.
Yeah.
It doesn't prove anything. And luckily, we get Bill Binney. Now, Bill is a no-nonsense guy. He's a mathematician.
Right? Remind our listeners, Ray, Bill, of course, is, again, like yourself, very highly thought of, former NSA officer, isn't he, Bill? You introduced me to Bill, actually. Go ahead there.
Yeah, he's technical director.
Yeah.
And the brains behind many of the collection things that were instituted and still are in operation today. Well, he keeps doing his homework. And it takes him about 1/10 the time it does most technical people to figure out what's going on. He's got the goods on this fellow called Lucifer 2.0. Now, just to explain, his role is key to these indictments. His role was key to that flaccid analysis, the assessment done by FBI, CIA, and NSA back in January of 2017. Everything depends on Lucifer. Now, who is he? Who is she? What is it? Well, it's not the Russians, okay? And Bill can prove it. And he's working on something now. Stay tuned. Next couple of days, you will see some technical things that we will try to make intelligible to the rest of us. But it shows that Lucifer was his stuff was manipulated. It's fraud out and out. And technical people can prove that. Now, what's the problem there, Richie? The problem there is that most lay people, they say, well, it's just too difficult. It's too hard. I can't understand it. Well, you can understand it, and you better pay attention because it shows in a way that is irrefutable that these guys were making it all up, and Lucifer, likely as not, was working for John Brennan rather than the Russians.
And the genesis of this, of course, correct me if I'm wrong, was the allegations, which it's far more than allegations, really. It happened that Clinton people, the nefarious activities around Bernie Sanders, that's where this begins, right? Really, if we talk about hacking and emails and servers and manipulation of a result it goes right to the heart of the primary between Clinton and Bernie Sanders.
That's exactly right, Richie. And what we have here is, very briefly, June 12, 2016. Julian Assange announces that he has emails relating to Hillary Clinton, and he's about to publish them. So June 12th. Okay. June 14th, this CrowdStrike, this very dubious cyber security firm working for Hillary Clinton, announces they found telltale signs of Russian intrusion into the DNC. Okay. Next day, June 15th, appears Guccifer 2.0. He says, yep, CrowdStrike has a right, and we did it. Okay, that make you suspicious? That's where it all started. Now, as soon as the Democrats realized that Julian Assange had the goods on how Hillary cheated, let's not play around with words, how she cheated Bernie Sanders out of the nomination, they ran into a panic zone. And they said, what are we going to do? And you can just see him sitting around. Anybody got any ideas? My God, if he comes out with this stuff before the Democratic National Convention, my God, Bernie might, what do we do? Somebody says, well, blame it on the Russians. And somebody else says, well, wait a second. It was Julian Assange. Not the, well, hey, we get a twofer here. We hate Julian Assange. Just, we'll say that the Russians hacked and they gave it to Julian Assange. And that way, we can blame the Russians and deflect attention from the content of these emails. And it worked like a charm. That's where it started. Now, what happened? What's really important here? Today, what did Trump say? What happened to the server? Okay. Now, they're blaming the intrusion. They're blaming the scooping up of emails from the Democratic National Committee on the Russians. Well, what happened when that was discovered, like on the 15th of June 2016 and later? Well, you know what? Nobody did anything, and the head of the FBI refused to insist on looking at the servers, on looking at the computers. He said, oh, my, what are we going to do? And he did nothing, okay?
Inspector Clouseau would have done that.
Right. Well,
And
I wish it was so benign.
Yeah,
but the thing is, here's Trump today saying, where's the server? Where's the server? What happened to the server? Because anybody with any investigatory skills would have seized possession of the server. As a matter of fact, the totally corrupt head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, it's supposed to be the Oversight Committee, orchestrated a hearing where he very gently asked James Comey, the head of the FBI at the time, he said, well, did you look at the server? Did you look at the computers? And Comey said, we never got a chance to look at the computers. Now, I agree that best practices would indicate that we should have actually had physical access, but there's this lovely, lovely cyber firm, CrowdStrike, that they're very good, top notch, so we relied on them. Period. End of discussion. Preempting any questioning from anybody else about, now wait a second, Mr. Comey, are you telling me, is John McCain saying this is an act of war? The Russians are waging war on us, and you didn't seize the computers? Could you explain that again? And so what I'm saying here is that was the most interesting, in some respects, parts of this press conference today, because Trump saying, where are the servers? I want to know what happened to the servers. That's what I asked my intelligence director. And you know what? Hillary in this case, the servers were destroyed. But you know what? This is something, please mark this down if you would. He talks about, 36 or 33,000 emails that Hillary destroyed or did not give to the people that she should have given to. Well, you know what? NSA, the National Security Agencies, has them. If they went over the internet, they have them. How do we know that? We know that not only from Bill Binney, from Ed Snowden. They collect it all, and they store it. So anything that goes on over the internet, including Strzok and Page's personal texts and telephone conversations, NSA has them. So there's a real disconnect. Has no one told Trump? Has no one told Trump to ask NSA to give him Hillary's emails, that he doesn't have to ask Russia for them? He can just go to the NSA and say, look, I want you to dig out those 33,000 Hillary emails. I want you to dig out what Trump and Lisa Page were saying in their personal cell phones. So there's an air of unreality here because Trump really doesn't seem to be very well briefed.
Well, I'm glad you said that, Ray. Can we? I know that we said 25 minutes. Can you stick around for another 10 minutes? Is that okay?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Let me just do a quick recap, by the way, just in case somebody is just tuned in. Our friend and somebody we're very fond of, Ray McGovern. I say that because of Ray's unimpeachable service, not only when he worked for his government, but when he left, and he now works for the people and for everybody else that he represents through his activism, through his peace work, through his journalism that you can read on raymcgovern.com. We've obviously been talking about the press conference today and the terrible incident before that where a journalist well known to Ray was thrown out of that press conference before it began because he had a piece of paper with the nuclear treaty printed on it. Absolutely deplorable stuff. We got into that. If you missed any of it, of course, it's all podcasted and YouTubed a little bit later on. You said something great there, this unreality. And this is what I don't understand. And I want to play you a little bit of audio. I know you heard it today, but I want to play it again. I don't understand what's going on with this story. Because what Trump has, to me anyway, and this is just me, it's my opinion and nobody else's, he's proven to be a kind of a wet dream for the neocons and the Zionists and the Israeli lobby in America. That's how I see it. And I sometimes talk to Paul Craig Roberts, and occasionally I talk to Philip Giraldi. That's because of you, because you introduced me to Phil. It's thanks to you that he was on this program, and we talk about these things. And I think he's a wet dream for these, you know, for this deep state. So what's going on, Ray? Why wouldn't he just demand those emails? And I want to play a little bit of audio that you heard today, and this is true. It's not edited. It's only about 55 seconds long. It's when the president and President Putin were asked, had they talked about Syria during their private meeting? And if so, what had they spoken about? And Trump's answer doesn't surprise me. Not that I'm a know-all, I'm certainly not, but it doesn't surprise me because of my opinion. But it must have been bizarre for everybody else listening to it. Ray, you heard this, but just to refresh our memory, when he was asked, what about Syria? What did you talk about? Did you come up with anything? This was Trump's answer. Have a listen.
Well, I guess I'll answer the first part of the question. We've worked with Israel long and hard for many years, many decades. I think we've never has any country been closer than we are. President Putin also is helping Israel, and we both spoke with Bibi Netanyahu, and they would like to do certain things with respect to Syria, having to do with the safety of Israel. So in that respect, we absolutely would like to work in order to help Israel, and Israel will be working with us, so both countries would work jointly. And I think that when you look at all of the progress that's been made in certain sections with the eradication of ISIS, we're about 98%, 99% there, and other things that have taken place that we've done, and that, frankly, Russia has helped us with in certain respects. But I think that working with Israel is a great thing, and creating safety for Israel is something that both President Putin and I would like to see very much.
Ray, well, what do you say to that? To me, correct me if I'm wrong, you're vastly more experienced than I am. I'm not patronising it. You are. You've been around longer. You know how these things work. I don't. He's just said there that we'll do whatever Israel tells us to do. Right?
Yeah, you know, I'm Irish and I tend to exaggerate. I said that he said Israel 4 times, but he really said Israel nine times.
Israel.
In that 1-minute clip. So, you know, if there were any lingering doubt as to who is running U.S. foreign policy towards Syria, towards Iran, toward any part of that area, I mean, just listen to that one clip. It's Israel. And we have the New York Times in one uncensored report in 2013 saying that when the Israeli policymakers were asked what their preferred option in Syria was, they said, we like to have no outcome there, because as long as there's chaos in Syria, Israel has nothing to fear from Syria. Now, the Golan Heights, I've been up there. They command the whole area. Who owns the Golan Heights? They're part of Syria. Who occupies them? The Israelis. And so we're bending over backwards to implement a buffer zone so that the territory occupied by Israel will not get anywhere near the terrorists, such as they are, left in that part of Syria. You know, there's one other thing. Since some of your people are British subjects, you should know that when George W. Bush was planning the attack on Iraq, and this goes back to April of 2002, he had a fellow named Tony Blair.
Yeah, you were right the first time.
Yeah, okay. Now, what did Blair testify to that Chilcot committee? He said, you know, what I remember about talking about, we're hot and heavy about Iraq, but, you know, Israel was the main factor there. We were on the phone with Israel several times during those conversations. Nobody did Chilcot. Did they ever ask Tony Blair, well, why were you in touch with Israel and you're planning to invade Iraq? So, you know, that's the God. It's just so disturbing, because it's not really, really hard to understand, but you won't find it. You won't find it in the major media, either in our country or in Great Britain.
Ray, here's a wacky conspiracy theory. I'm mindful of the fact that I'm sure you've got another 10 calls like this coming your way today, so I won't keep you too much longer. The wacky conspiracy theory, which I don't believe is a conspiracy theory, here's my 2 cents worth. It's all a charade. It's all theatre. How could the deep state be trying to, you know, unseat Trump or get rid of him when Trump is as much a puppet as his predecessors were before him? I can only conclude that there is an agenda to make us all even more engaged than we were. Maybe Joe and Josephine Public were disengaging from politics because they began to see through it because of the work of the independent media. Men and women like yourself and others giving airing to these types of things. Maybe they wanted to re-engage people with the whole process, get people mired in identity politics, and it's all just one big charade, Ray. I can only conclude that. I know it's going to sound preposterous to some people, but, you know, I don't believe there's any genuine desire to get Trump out of his seat there in the Oval Office, because he's as good or as bad as any of the rest of them, and the financial elites and the military-industrial complex, they don't care who's sitting in the high seat, you know, so long as they're playing by the rules of their game. Over to you.
Well, Richie, I have to tell you that there is a difference in kind here, not just degree. Trump is by far, in my view, the worst president the United States ever had. The difference between rich and poor, which is my major rule of thumb, is just zooming the gap there. He's doing all manner of things with respect to the environment. The list of outrageous things that he has done and the people he's hired to do them goes on forever. Now, what about this charade? We say charade here. I remember John Pilger asking me about a charade. Oh, you mean charade?
Very posh, yeah.
Well, the charade really is the military-industrial congressional intelligence media complex. Trump is no match for that. Eisenhower was right. Eisenhower wanted to say military-industrial congressional complex. They didn't let him say congressional, but Congress is in there up to the hilt. Media, that's the new element here. I have never seen the media so bad as they are now, and I've been in Washington for 55 years. The biggest change that I've observed is that we no longer have, in any real sense, a free media in the newspapers and on TV. Thank God there are people like you and other people that have me on, that some people can at least hear what I think about things or what my colleagues do. So what we're up against is a very, very lucrative arms control business. I'm sorry, not arms control, arms sales business. We saw it in Trump saying, let's do 2% at NATO. No, 4%. And look, Lockheed and Raytheon, Grumman, they're great. You ought to buy. It's just so transparent. So he's a creature of these guys. And as long as they let him do his thing, as long as they let him conclude inordinately lucrative deals with Saudi Arabia, people talked about repression in Russia. Repression. Oh, my God. Yeah, there's repression in Russia, but it doesn't hold a candle to what's going on in Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, who fund all these think tanks we have here in Washington. In any case, it's all about the money. And as long as Trump keeps stoking up more business for the money people, and as long, I have to add this, Richie, as long as there's no moral voice speaking out against this. Now, this is very brief, but when Pope Francis came to speak to Congress, it's almost 3 years ago now, he stood up and he said, the main problem is the blood-drenched arms trade. Whoa! I looked at that, I said, my God! And all the congressmen get up and they're clapping and they're clapping, and then they're looking in their vest pockets to make sure the latest envelope from Lockheed and Raytheon is still there. It was giving hypocrisy a bad name. But what happens several months later? Trump is going to visit the Vatican, and McGovern. I don't agree with the Pope and everything. Lots of things I don't, but I really thought he was on target with the blood-drenched arms trade. I said, "Oh my God, this is great! The Pope will have a chance to tell Trump what's up." Now, Trump goes to the Vatican the day after he has concluded the most exorbitant arms trade agreement, arms sales agreement with Saudi Arabia, and I'm saying, "Oh, this is even better." The Pope is going to confront them. What does he do? Well, my progressive friends were very proud. They said, "Oh, Ray, look, you see what that Francis did?" I said, "What we do?" He didn't smile for the first 3 photo ops. How about that, Ray? And I'm saying, "Oh my God, yeah." Then he started smiling. Then he glad-handed this guy. And then what did he do? He gave him an encyclical. Now, most of people don't know what an encyclical is. The highest pronouncement issued by the Vatican. It's usually pretty good these days. Okay, what was this about? This was about the environment. Was that a good thing? It's a great thing to give Trump the encyclical on the environment. But you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of Albert Camus after World War II. A bunch of Dominicans asked him to their monastery. They said, "Albert, what did you think of the church's role in World War II?" And he said, "Well, you will be surprised to hear this from an unbeliever, but I kept waiting for a voice from Rome. No voice came from Rome. My friends and I were just extremely agitated that no one spoke from a moral point of view. And then after the war, I was told, 'Oh no, Albert, you are wrong. You are wrong.' There was a statement from Rome. And they said it came in the form of an encyclical. And so I, Albert, said, qu'est-ce que c'est? What is an encyclical? And then they told me what an encyclical is. Then I said to myself, if no one knows, if not even Albert Camus knows about the encyclical, whose fault is that? So this was sort of a flashback to Camus saying this about an encyclical. They give this, Francis gives this encyclical, a good one, by the way. It's great on the environment to Trump, but he doesn't say diddly about the thing that he said was the main problem before Congress when he said, it's the blood-drenched arms trade. There it is in a nutshell. Even Francis flunks the test, in my view.
Yeah, and this is why I'll always argue the charade scenario, because while we jump all over one another, you have the Antifa, the anti-fascists, you have the alt-right killing one another and screaming at one another over these personalities like Trump and others. The military-industrial complex, or as PCR calls it, the military security complex. I'm not going to try and repeat what you said with those extra nouns I think you used to describe it, but it just goes about its business while we're distracted by it. That's how how I see it. And you know, I wonder, and we are, I have kept you far longer than I agreed to, which is unfair. But, you know, I'd like to think that in an ideal, in a fair world, in a proper world, in a real world where people were real and genuine, Trump would have went in there today and Putin would have said to him, listen, you know why we annexed Crimea, you know what's really gone in Ukraine, you know who Victoria Nuland is and what happened in that country, and this can't go on any longer. And between me and you, pal, you know, we can change all this nonsense and we can out these neocon Zionists for who they are. But of course it doesn't happen, because I ultimately believe Trump and Putin are slaves to the same master. I'm going to give you the final word, Ray, and a sincere thanks again for coming on today when your time is in demand. Final word to you, my friend.
You're most welcome, Richie, anytime. Now, I would just tie this back to what we were talking about with respect to the summit today, okay? Where is the resistance coming from? Why is it that long after they have to concede that they lost the election because they had a really lousy candidate that nobody trusted? I mean, that Hillary Clinton, that's why they lost. Why is it that they keep hammering on, no, Russia sabotage. Russia is responsible for having Donald Trump win the election. Why is it? Because they don't want any relaxation of tensions with Russia. What would happen if peace broke out? My God, what would happen to the common European battle tank? Yeah. What would happen to increasing to 4% of NATO? Oh, so, you know, if you tie it all back, it's a pretty corrupt situation. My hope is that there are enough of us now aware of it, and enough guts like Sam Husseini had today to say, look, we're right on the brink of a real catastrophe unless we talk about real things like nuclear disarmament.
Thanks for bringing up Sam Husseini at the beginning of our chat, and shame on me for not mentioning it. That is jaded, that. It's so jaded. Not what happened to Sam, but guys like me not talking about that because it's become so normal. And of course, if you don't talk about it, it just goes on. So it's right and proper that you brought it up. Folks, you know where to read Ray. I've tweeted out links to his articles. Go to raymcgovern.com. Legendary, distinguished servant to his country for decades, Ray McGovern, peace activist and great writer these days. I'm sure the phone is off the hook there, Ray, so thanks for coming on today, and I hope we'll be able to catch up again in the autumn. Thanks for your time.
You're most welcome, Richie.